Sit back. Let the weight of the day fall away. The fire is low, the night stretches long, and only the whisper of the wind keeps the silence company. Tonight, we walk into a different world, not of kings and knights, not of castles and crowns, but of those who carried the heaviest burdens and left the fewest words behind. The poor peasants of the Middle Ages. For them, the road was not a place of adventure. It was a place of necessity, a place of danger, a place of hunger. And when the sun set, when the fields grew dark and the villages locked their doors, the question was simple: where would they sleep? Not in soft beds, not in rooms with painted walls, but in barns, under bridges, in the shadows of churches, or beneath the open sky. So, lean back, close your eyes, and listen. Tonight, we follow the footsteps of those who walked the roads of medieval Europe with nothing but calloused hands, a bundle of straw, and hope that morning would come. This is boring history for sleep. The road in the Middle Ages was not like the road you know. There were no straight lines of stone, no smooth stretches of gravel, no guiding signs pointing the way. Instead, there were paths, trodden down by hooves and bare feet, pressed into mud by the wheels of carts that had long since broken. Some were little more than tracks carved through the fields, others little more than lines in the forest where the grass had been crushed flat. Peasants did not travel often. Most were bound to their land, tied to the soil as much as the crops they planted. Their lives were measured by the seasons: the ploughing, the sowing, the harvest, the winter frost. But still, the road called. Not for leisure, not for adventure, but for duty. A poor man might leave his village because his lord demanded it, to bring a cart of grain to the nearest market, to carry messages, or rent, to serve in war. Others left to seek work when hunger gnawed too sharply at their bellies, when their own fields failed and another man's harvest promised survival. And some, a smaller number, but still enough to matter, left for faith. Pilgrimages to shrines and holy places drew even the poorest, for the promise of salvation outweighed the certainty of hardship. And so the peasant walked. He carried little, perhaps a bundle tied with string, a hunk of bread hard as stone, a patched cloak. His feet were wrapped in simple leather, if he had shoes at all. The road stretched before him, but he did not know where it ended. He only knew that he had to walk. When night fell, the sun in the Middle Ages was more than light. It was safety. By day, the road was dangerous, but by night it was worse. No lamps lit the way. No houses welcomed the stranger. Wolves prowled the forests. Bandits lurked in the shadows, and the cold could kill as surely as a blade. And so, when the light began to fade, the peasant looked for a place to stay. He could not afford an inn. Those were for merchants, travelers with coins in their purses, men who could pay for bread, ale, and a spot of straw in a crowded room. For the poor, the choices were different. A barn, if a farmer would allow it. The stable floor, shared with oxen and horses, the smell of hay and dung filling the air. A roadside ditch, where the earth gave just enough shelter from the wind. Or, if fortune smiled, the porch of a church, where stone arches offered at least a roof above his head. The question was never comfort. It was always survival. Hospitality in the Middle Ages was a fragile thing. In some places, it was considered holy. A duty to take in the stranger, to share bread with the hungry, for all men were pilgrims in this world. In others, suspicion ruled. Strangers were dangerous. Strangers carried disease. Strangers carried knives. Strangers carried misfortune. A poor peasant knocking at the door of a cottage might be turned away with curses, or offered a crust of bread and a corner of the floor, he might find kindness or cruelty, but rarely certainty, and so he learned to ask little, to expect less, to be grateful for straw in a corner, for a fire to warm his hands, for the sound of human voices instead of the howls of the dark. Imagine him now. The road behind him stretches long, his feet blistered, his bundle light. The fields are quiet. Smoke rises from the thatched roofs of a village, but he does not know these people, and they do not know him. The church bell has long since tolled, and shutters are closed. He lingers by the edge of the fields, uncertain. He cannot pay for a bed. He cannot demand shelter. His eyes scan the barns, the stables, the low wooden fences. Somewhere, he thinks, he might find space enough to rest, and so he walks toward the smell of hay. The stable door is ajar, the oxen snorting softly in the dark. He slips inside, curls against the wall, the straw prickling his skin. It is not warm, but it is not the road. It is not safe, but it is safer than the open night. Sleep comes in fits and starts, broken by the shifting of animals, the drip of water, the cold pressing against his back. But still, he sleeps. Because tomorrow the road will call again. A world without rest for the poor. The journey was never about where they stayed. It was about whether they made it at all. The road was long, food was scarce, and the body was fragile. To be poor was to live without certainty, and to travel was to carry that uncertainty with every step. You would not last a day, not because of wolves, not because of bandits, not because of hunger, but because the world of the road offered no rest, no safe bed, no locked door, no guarantee that the morning would come, and still they walked, because to stay was to starve. The church bell was more than a sound. In the Middle Ages, it was a boundary between danger and safety, between the open road and the promise of shelter. When the sun set and the sky darkened, a poor peasant with blistered feet and an empty stomach would often turn toward the sound of that bell. For the church, whether a small wooden chapel or a great stone cathedral, was more than a place of worship. It was, sometimes, a place to rest. But the welcome was not guaranteed. A weary traveller approaching the monastery gates might be turned away, left to sleep against the cold stone walls outside. Yet there was also a tradition, a sacred duty of hospitality, rooted in faith, to give bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, shelter to the stranger. Not all kept it, but enough that the desperate kept trying. Imagine the figure of a peasant, leaning heavily on a wooden staff, approaching the thick oak doors of a monastery. His clothes are ragged, his face hollow with hunger, his bundle little more than rags tied together. He knocks once, softly, then waits. The wind bites at his skin, the night presses in. At last, the door creaks open, and a monk with a lamp peers out. There are questions. Who are you? Where do you come from? Why are you here? He answers as best he can. Sometimes the door shuts. Sometimes the monk steps aside and lets him in. If he is lucky, he will not be taken into a warm chamber. That is for the brothers, the men of God. But he might be given a corner of the guest hall, or even a space in the stable where the monastery's animals sleep. He might receive a crust of bread, a bowl of thin broth, perhaps even a blessing. He will not be comfortable, but he will be alive, and for the poor, that was enough. Pilgrims, too, found their way to such doors. Men and women walking miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, toward shrines and relics, their feet bloodied, their bodies weary. For them, the church offered more than rest. It offered meaning. To sleep in the shadow of holy walls was to believe that each step had purpose, that suffering itself might be transformed into grace. The poorest pilgrim might lie on cold flagstones, his cloak wrapped tight against the chill, but in his heart he carried a warmth born not from fire, but from faith. Not every church was generous. Fear of vagabonds was real. Disease, theft, violence, all could follow the stranger. And so, in many places, the poor were pushed to the margins, allowed only to sleep outside, under the porch, near the cemetery where the dead kept silent watch. Still, even this was something. A roof above, stone walls against the wind, the faint comfort of candles burning within. In larger towns, hospices grew alongside churches, simple places run by monks or nuns, where the sick and the weary could rest. They were crowded, unsanitary, filled with the coughing and moaning of the ill. But to the traveler who had walked for days without rest, even this chaos was a sanctuary. He would lie among strangers, his bundle clutched to his chest, the air heavy with incense and sweat. He might sleep, or half sleep, or simply close his eyes and pretend. The church was both salvation and judgment. To enter its doors as a poor man was to place yourself at the mercy of others. A priest might take pity, offering bread and shelter, or he might see only sin. A drifter, a beggar, a burden. The same stone walls that protected could also exclude. And yet, for countless peasants on the road, the risk was worth it. Because to sleep outside, on the bare ground, was worse. There, the cold crept into your bones. The dew soaked your cloak. The night carried the growls of wolves and the distant shouts of thieves. Beneath the church porch, at least, there was the comfort of stone. A belief, however faint, that God's house would guard them until morning. Picture it, the peasant curled in the shadow of a cathedral, his head resting on his bundle, his breath visible in the cold night air. Above him, gargoyles stare down from the roof, their faces twisted, watching. Inside, the choir sings, voices rising in the darkness. He cannot see them, he cannot join them, but he can hear, and as the sound drifts through the stone, he lets his eyes close. You would not last a night there. The ground is hard, the air bitter, the fear constant. But he has walked all day, and tomorrow he must walk again. So he sleeps, not in comfort, but in surrender. And when dawn comes, when the bell tolls once more, he rises, hungry, weary, but alive. And so the road continues. The town in the Middle Ages was not a place of welcome. Its gates were high, its walls thick, its doors heavy. By day, they opened to merchants and farmers, to wagons of grain and herds of cattle, to pilgrims with badges on their cloaks. But by night, they closed. Iron and oak barred the way, and outside, in the shadow of those walls, the poor gathered. Imagine the peasant arriving at dusk. His legs are heavy, his cloak damp with rain. He sees the towers rising above him, the promise of shelter inside, the smell of bread baking, the murmur of voices beyond the walls. He walks faster, heart pounding, but the bell has already tolled. The gates are shut. And so he waits. The ground beneath the walls is hard and damp, scattered with others like him. Traders who came too late, pilgrims slowed by age, beggars with nothing at all. They huddle together in groups, sharing scraps, sharing warmth. Some find a place beneath the eaves of a gatehouse. Others curl against the stone itself, trying to steal heat from the wall. The town is so close, but it might as well be another world. When dawn comes and the doors creak open again, the crowd stirs. The guards watch suspiciously, their hands on spears. Some are allowed in, others turned away. But the night has passed, and that is what mattered most. Markets, too, offered their strange form of shelter. By day they were chaos. Shouting vendors, animals braying, the crush of people jostling for space. But when the stalls closed and the merchants went home, the square grew quiet. A poor traveler might creep into the empty space, curl beneath a cart, or lie among the scraps of hay. The smell of fish and blood, of dung and smoke, clung to the air, but it was still better than the open road. The market square was a place where no one belonged at night, and yet everyone could be found there. The poor, the desperate, the lost. Bridges, too, carried their share of sleepers. By day, they were lifelines, connecting towns, carrying carts, echoing with hooves and footsteps. By night, when the noise faded, the arches below became homes for the unwanted. Beneath the stones, near the water's edge, peasants huddled in the damp, the river lapped against the banks, rats scurried among the stones, and the cold seeped into their bones. Yet still, they slept, because the bridge gave shelter from rain, from wind, from prying eyes. But the danger was always there. Town watchmen patrolled the gates, the markets, the bridges. To be found sleeping there was to be called a vagrant, a thief, a danger to order. A man might be whipped, a woman chased away, a child dragged back to the road. And so they learned to sleep lightly, always ready to flee at the sound of boots. You would not last a night there. The stones would chill you, the damp would break your strength. The fear of discovery would gnaw at your mind. The city was near, but its walls were not for you. The market was built for trade, not for rest. The bridge carried men forward, but you were left behind, beneath its arches, a shadow among shadows. And yet, for the poor of the Middle Ages, these places became home, not by choice, but by necessity. The town gate, the market square, the bridge by the river. These were the resting places of those who had nothing else. A bed of stone, a roof of sky, and the hope that dawn would bring another chance. And when the morning came, they rose stiff and tired, shoulders bent beneath their bundles, and walked again. Past the gates, past the markets, over the bridges, back onto the endless road. The road in the Middle Ages was never empty. It was a line cut through forest and field, through swamp and hill, and along it walked not only peasants, but hunters and soldiers, merchants and thieves. To step onto that road as a poor traveler was to place yourself at the mercy of all who claimed it. The first danger was hunger. A man might leave his village with a loaf of bread, hard and black, a lump of cheese, perhaps a flask of weak ale. But food weighed heavy, and the journey was long. By the second day, the loaf was gone, the cheese nothing more than crumbs. Then the eyes turned to the hedgerows, the rivers, the kindness of strangers. A berry plucked here, a fish caught there, a crust begged at a doorway. Hunger gnawed constantly, and with it came weakness. And weakness on the road was as dangerous as any blade. Then came the beasts. Wolves prowled the forests, lean and grey, their howls echoing in the night. Bears were rarer, but still feared, their strength enough to shatter bone. Even dogs, strays turned wild, hunted in packs. For a peasant who slept under the open sky, every rustle in the grass, every crack of a twig carried threat. Fires were kept burning not only for warmth, but for warning, a fragile circle of light against the pressing dark. But the greatest danger came from men. Bandits haunted the roads, especially near forests and hills where ambush was easy. Some were outlaws, cast from villages, others deserters from armies, armed with blades stolen or scavenged. They watched for travelers weighed down with goods, for merchants, for pilgrims with purses tied at their belts. But even a poor peasant, with nothing but rags and a bundle, was at risk. A knife at the throat, a blow in the dark, and whatever little he carried was gone. Sometimes, his life as well. And then there were the lords. For every road crossed the land of someone, and every land had its tolls. A man might be stopped at a bridge, at a ford, at a gate, demanded to pay coin he did not have. If he could not pay, he might be beaten, turned back, or pressed into labor. To be poor was not to be invisible. It was to be exposed. Weather, too, was a relentless enemy. Rain turned the roads into rivers of mud. Cloaks grew heavy with water, feet sank deep, and carts mired. Cold crept into the bones, froze the fingers, numbed the toes until they blackened. Summer brought heat that burned, thirst that cracked the lips. There was no shelter from it, no protection, only endurance. And always there was suspicion. Villages were tight circles of trust. A stranger knocking on a door might be seen as a beggar, a thief, a spy. To be caught wandering near fields or barns could mean shouts, stones, even the blade of a pitchfork. The poor carried no letters, no seals, nothing to prove their innocence. Their presence was itself a crime, so the peasant learned to move quietly, to walk by day, to hide by night, to avoid the thicker woods, the narrower paths, the places where men and beasts could strike unseen. He learned to keep his bundles small, his head low, his answers simple, to ask for little, to expect less, to survive not by strength but by invisibility. You would not last a day on such a road. The hunger would weaken you, the cold would break you, the fear would gnaw until sleep itself betrayed you. Every step would be danger, every night a gamble, every stranger a threat. And yet, the poor walked these roads. They carried their lives on their backs, their hopes in their hands, their prayers on their lips. They knew the risks, and still they went, because hunger at home was worse than hunger on the road. Because the fields that bound them could no longer feed them. Because duty, faith, or desperation left them no choice. And so, when you imagine the poor traveler of the Middle Ages, do not think of adventure. Do not think of freedom. Think instead of weary feet on muddy paths, of eyes scanning the trees for shadows, of hands clutching a bundle as if it were treasure. Think of a man or woman who knew that every step might be their last, and yet stepped anyway. The dangers were many, but so too was necessity, and necessity drove them forward, into the teeth of wolves, into the eyes of bandits, into the endless dark of the medieval road. The dangers were many, but so too was necessity, and necessity drove them forward, into the teeth of wolves, into the eyes of bandits, into the endless dark of the medieval road. Night after night, the same question returned: where to sleep. A field was safer than a forest, but fields belonged to someone, and to be found there was to risk the anger of a farmer who feared thieves more than he feared God. A barn was warm, but barns were locked, and the animals within more valuable than the man outside. A church porch offered shelter, but so too did it expose the traveler to every eye that passed. So they improvised. A bundle of straw gathered from a roadside, a cloak pulled tight against the wind. A fire lit small, hidden in a hollow where its glow would not betray them. A traveler might place stones in a circle, feeding the flames with twigs and branches. Knowing that fire was both friend and enemy, it kept wolves at bay, but it also told men where to find him. When no fire was possible, they huddled together. Men, women, sometimes whole families pressed close, sharing warmth with the same body that shared hunger. Straw, grass, even moss served as bedding. Bundles doubled as pillows. Shoes, if they had them, were kept on, lest they vanish in the night. The road was not quiet. Even at night, noises filled the dark. The distant howl of wolves, the creak of trees, the rustle of unseen creatures. Every sound could be danger, And so sleep came lightly, broken by jolts of fear. A man might wake a dozen times before dawn, clutching his bundle, staring into the shadows, ears straining for movement. Rain was another enemy. Cloaks grew heavy, straw turned to muck. Rivers swelled and flooded the low ground where they slept. There were no dry beds, no change of clothes. Only damp, clinging misery, and the hope that the morning sun might dry them enough to walk again. In towns, under bridges, beneath market stalls, they lay as shadows among stone. The smell of water, the stink of refuse, the biting cold of stone against skin. A child might cry, a dog bark, a guard shout, and they would scatter, running into the alleys, clutching their few belongings, hunted not by beasts, but by men. Some found kindness. A farmer who allowed them the corner of a barn. A monk who offered bread and straw in the cloister yard. A fellow traveler who shared a cloak. But kindness was rare, and trust was fragile. For a gift today might become suspicion tomorrow, and the hand that gave might be the first to point and cry thief, or worse. So the poor learned to vanish. They slept where no one looked, in ditches, in hedgerows, in the hollow of fallen trees. They moved at dawn before the villagers stirred, leaving no trace of where they had been. They became part of the landscape, unnoticed, unseen. You would not last such a night. The ground too hard, the insects too many, the cold too deep. Your body would ache, your eyes grow heavy, but sleep would never come fully. And when it did, it would come with fear. Fear that you would wake to teeth at your throat, or a hand at your bundle, or the shout of men with torches. But for them, there was no choice. To stay at home was to starve. To remain in the village was to sink deeper into poverty. The road, harsh as it was, held the only chance of survival. A chance to find work, to beg at new doors, to sell labor in another town, to walk until fortune changed, however slightly. The poor did not dream of comfort. They dreamed only of reaching morning. And when morning came, they rose stiff and hollow, their faces grey, their eyes red from restless hours. They shook the dew from their cloaks, stamped the cold from their feet, and walked again. Always walking, always searching, always hoping that somewhere along the road there might be a place where a poor man could lie down without fear. But that place was rare, and so the journey went on. Morning in the Middle Ages was not gentle. It was not sunlight streaming through glass, not warmth on the sheets, not the soft murmur of a waking house. It was the toll of a bell, the bark of dogs, the shuffle of carts over stone. For the poor man on the road, it was dew on his cloak, mud on his hands, and the ache of bones that had never truly rested. He rose not refreshed, but simply because he could not stay. Roads were for moving. Villages were for the known, not the stranger. A body that lingered too long became suspicious, and suspicion was more dangerous than hunger. So he walked, even when his legs trembled, even when his eyes burned with fatigue. Because to stop was to invite questions, and questions led to judgment. The journey itself was unending. There was no holiday, no escape, no comfort at the end. A peasant did not walk for pleasure. He walked because his lord commanded it, because the market demanded it, because the church promised salvation. And when his errand was done, he walked back, only to begin again when necessity called once more. Where did he sleep, then, on all these journeys? He slept wherever he could. In barns, when kindness opened a door. Under bridges, when the town barred its gates. Against church walls, when priests refused him. In ditches, when no other choice remained. And yet, he slept. Not because the bed was soft, not because the night was safe, but because his body could endure no more. Sleep came like surrender, not like peace. It came in fragments, in shivers, in the brief escape of exhaustion. You would not last. You, who close your eyes in silence, who choose your pillow, who draw blankets against the night, you would not last in his place. The noise, the cold, the fear, the hunger, it would break you long before the road did. The absence of safety, the absence of comfort, the absence of certainty would gnaw at your mind until rest itself became impossible. And yet, millions did last. For centuries they walked these roads, slept on straw, endured the dark. They lived because they had no choice. Their strength was not born of comfort, but of necessity. Think of them now. The merchant's inn, with its noise and fleas. The church porch, with its hard stone. The market square, emptied of voices, filled with shadows. The bridge, its arches echoing with water and rats. The stable, thick with the smell of animals. These were their beds. These were their pillows. These were the places where the poor closed their eyes and dreamed not of comfort, but simply of surviving until dawn. And then imagine yourself among them. Imagine walking with nothing but a cloak, a crust of bread, and the road stretching before you. Imagine begging for a corner of straw, waiting for gates to open, curling against cold stone, listening for the howl of wolves in the dark. Could you endure it? The truth is simple. You could not. Not for a week. Not for a day. Not even for a night. The medieval road was merciless. It did not welcome you. It did not care for you. It did not forgive you. It simply stretched on, through mud and forest and field, carrying those who had no choice but to walk it. And among them, the poor peasant, tired, hungry, forgotten, found his rest wherever he could. A barn, a ditch, a stone floor, a patch of straw. That was all. That was enough. And so tonight, when you close your eyes, think of them. Think of the millions who walked before you, who slept under bridges and porches, who faced the night with nothing but hope. Their world is gone, but the memory lingers. In the silence of stone churches, in the ruins of old roads, in the shadows of bridges that still stand. Let that memory carry you now into the quiet, into the dark, into rest. And know that if you had walked their path, if you had lived their life, you would not have lasted a day. Let that memory carry you now into the quiet, into the dark, into rest. And know that if you had walked their path, if you had lived their life, you would not have lasted a day. But they did. Night after night, step after step, they endured. And in that endurance lies the true story of the Middle Ages, not of kings or castles, but of common lives stretched thin between hunger and hope. To walk with them now, even in memory, is to feel the weight of what survival truly meant. They did not measure life by comfort, for there was none. They measured it by the rising of the sun, the toll of the bell, the handful of grain that kept the body moving. Rest was not soft, but hard, pressed into earth, into straw, into stone. And yet they rested, because without rest there was no walking, and without walking there was no life. You can almost hear them still, if you listen closely. The shuffle of bare feet on a dirt road, the murmur of voices huddled by a fire, the cough of a child, the creak of a cart, the soft cry of someone who has no place to go. These are the sounds that filled the medieval night, sounds that drifted beneath the stars, while villages slept behind shuttered doors. And above them, the sky stretched endlessly, the same sky you see now. The same stars that watched you tonight watched them centuries ago, as they lay curled against the cold ground, praying only to make it to morning. The stars did not judge. The night did not care. But still, they endured beneath it, nameless, forgotten. and yet essential. Every journey they made carried risk, but also carried memory. For in every town, in every church, in every bridge and barn, countless peasants left their presence, even if only in silence. Their stories were not written in books, not carved in stone, not told in song. They were carried in footsteps, in worn cloaks, in the straw that bore their weight for a single night. Close your eyes, and you can follow them, through the mud of spring, the dust of summer, the frost of winter. Past the inns where they could not stay, past the gates that closed before them, past the barns where they begged for a corner of straw. Each step forward was an act of survival, and each night of rest was a victory, no matter how small. And when dawn came, they rose again. Always. The road waited, and they walked. Not because they wished to, not because they dreamed of elsewhere, but because they had no choice. That is what makes their endurance so unfathomable to us now. For we are used to choices. To locks on doors, to warmth at hand, to certainty in every step. They had none, and still they walked. Would you have walked with them? Could you have lain your head on cold stone, your body on damp straw, your bundle clutched to your chest as you tried to find sleep? Could you have risen, weak and tired, and walked again the next day, and the next, and the next? The answer is simple. You could not. But they did. And because they did, villages survived, markets thrived, churches filled, kingdoms endured. The peasants carried the weight of the Middle Ages on their feet, in their hunger, in their restless nights. They were the ones who made the world move, even as the world gave them nothing in return. So let that memory linger with you now. Let it quiet your thoughts. Let it remind you that every comfort you know is built on the lives of those who knew none. Their roads are long gone, their barns collapsed, their bridges rebuilt, their churches silent. But their footsteps echo still. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, you walk with them. Along muddy paths, beneath shuttered windows, past gates that will not open. You walk with them into the cold night, carrying nothing but the hope that morning will come. And in that memory, you find your rest. Sleep now. The night stretches long, and the roads of the past grow quiet. But if you listen, you can still hear them. The faint tread of bare feet on packed earth, the creak of carts pulled by weary oxen, the distant toll of a bell marking time not by hours, but by survival. For the poor peasant on the road, every sound mattered. The snap of a twig could be a thief. The rustle of grass could be a wolf. The silence of the fields could mean safety or danger waiting unseen. And so he listened, always, even as his eyes closed and his body begged for sleep. Rest was not a gift. It was a gamble. You would not last such a night. The cold would seep into your bones. The damp would cling to your skin. Hunger would gnaw until your dreams became twisted with visions of bread you could not eat, fires you could not reach. Yet he endured it, because there was no other way. And in enduring, he carried history forward. Not the history of kings and battles, not the history carved in stone or sung by poets, but the history of footsteps. Of roads worn by countless journeys, of bonds that sheltered countless strangers, of bridges that heard countless sighs. It was his history, and though his name was never written, his life left its mark in every field, every market, every stone of the old towns. Close your eyes, and you can feel the weight of it, the weight of walking without knowing where you will sleep. The weight of lying down without knowing if you will wake. The weight of living a life where each day is carried not by comfort, but by necessity. And yet, in that weight, there is a strange calm, because for him, there was no question of what to do, The road was there, and he walked. The night came, and he slept where he could. It was not choice, it was life. And so tonight you follow him, not in hardship, but in memory. You walk with him beneath the same stars. You lie with him on the same cold ground. You listen with him to the same night sounds. You do not need to rise, you do not need to walk, but for a little while you share his world. And in that sharing, your own burdens grow lighter. The fire fades low, the air grows still. The journey ends not in an inn, not in a house, not in comfort, but in quiet. Always quiet. So let that quiet carry you. Into rest, into silence, into sleep. And in sleep the road fades. The mud, the hunger, the cold, they slip away. The walls of towns vanish. The tolling of bells grows distant. The flicker of fire dies low. Only quiet remains. The peasant, too, rests. His bundle at his side, his cloak wrapped tight, his body curled against the night. He has walked as far as he can. And though his bed is nothing but straw or stone, still he sleeps, not in comfort, but in surrender, not in peace, but in survival. And you drift with him now, through fields where owls hunt in silence, through forests where wolves prowl unseen, along bridges where water laps softly against stone, past barns that creak in the wind, markets emptied of their noise, churches standing as watchmen in the dark. These places do not ask for your name, do not care for your presence. They hold only shadows. Yet in those shadows, sleep takes root. You walk no further. You carry no weight. You seek no shelter. You are only here, in the quiet, where the footsteps of the past grow faint. The voices fade too. The murmurs of markets, the songs of taverns, the prayers of pilgrims, all become whispers, then echoes, then nothing. The night is no longer heavy with fear. It is light, endless, without demand. The world drifts away, and with it, the memory of hardship. Breathe slowly. The fire is gone. The stars shine above, indifferent but eternal. The ground beneath you is cold, but it no longer matters. What matters is only this, that you have reached the end of the road. And in reaching it, there is nothing more to endure. You would not last a day in their world, but you do not need to. You need only drift with them now, across the centuries, across the silence, into sleep. Let the memory of their footsteps guide you. Let the hush of their nights surround you. Let the weight of their survival remind you that rest, however fragile, always comes. Close your eyes. The journey is over. The road is gone. There is no hunger, no cold, no fear, only quiet, into rest, into silence, into sleep, and deeper still,